you've used so many examples of history to support your argument. That's really fascinating. Could you, what's like your favorite history topic, and could you elaborate more about it?
My favorite history topic. Um, Most of my historical research have been focused on events like, for example, as you know, famine, genocides, different world conflicts, and how they resulted in, for example, these acts of mass violence. So a lot of things I study is not only politics, it's also like long-term issues
Mhm.
rooted in society and rooted in like ethnic strife. Is there any particular aspect you want to ask about?
Yeah, that actually is a question. So, when you're studying these things like mass killings, genocides and things like that, there's certain patterns you notice with like what the authoritarian government decides to do, right? Have you noticed any of those patterns within recent events? For example, uh, in the Israel and Palestine war, for example, or they're just any similarities?
Well, there are a lot of different similarities in which like how governments and like just different factions try to manipulate that serves as the root causes of such violence. I haven't invested much into Israel and Palestine, but I can talk about other examples. And
Yeah,
also because Israel and Palestine is kind of sensitive, so
for sure, for
so
sure.
I'd rather talk about like other issues. Um, for example, one of the commonalities I have noticed is the this issue of propaganda. The some in a lot of different historical examples, people have governments and different factions have tried to make use of mass media or state propaganda to try to incite like hatred that has been long been rooted in like different social and political aspects. For example, do you want me to talk about a particular example?
Yeah, sure. Go ahead.
Well, of course. I have been doing a research in my school on the Rwandan genocide. So basically, in Rwanda, there are two major ethnic groups. The majority Hutu, accounting for 85% of the population, and the minority Tutsis, accounting for like around 14% of the population. So generally, these two ethnic groups are actually not they do not have a lot of differences. They are kind of actually very similar genetically, but their racial divides were exacerbated during colonial rule by the Belgians, who classified every Rwandan person into one of the two different one of the two ethnic groups and gave them very rigid classifications and tried to turn them against one another by making the minority Tutsis the leaders of Rwanda, while the Hutus were like their voices were suppressed. They lived like in a lower social standing. So upon the independence of Rwanda, due to like international calls for democracy. So the majority Hutus again became the leaders of the country, and they tried to push their hatred of the Tutsis in colonial rule. During colonial rule, into retaliation, into mass media condemned the Tutsis, and in mass purges across the country that are directed against mass violence directed against the Tutsis, which forced many Tutsis to flee abroad, especially into neighboring Uganda, neighboring Burundi, where they organized military forces to try to fight against the Hutus in Rwanda. So the Yemen Civil War was a cause of the Rwandan genocide in which in Rwanda, the Hutu government used different kinds of media, most notably the radio, the RTLM, magazines and newspapers, including the Kangura magazine, to try to convince Hutus that Tutsis are the ultimate threat and they have to raise their arms to kill the Tutsis to settle the event for once and for all. Um, for example, um, for example, the RTLM radio its broadcast included a lot of different employed a lot of different elements to try to that convince Hutus that Tutsis are bad. For example, they use the term in Yenzi, which in Rwandan means cockroaches, characterizing Tutsis as cockroaches that must be exterminated. And sometimes on radio, they share the addresses of particular Tutsi members to try to ask Hutus to kill them. And they also share like information. For example, anyone who is taller, anyone with a longer nose is a Tutsi, and that you have to raise your arms. You have to take out the machetes that you use for your agricultural tool. You use for agricultural tools to go out and to murder any Tutsi that you see on the street. So it's basically what the and also in complement to radio, the magazine and the newspaper provides deeper ideological focuses. For example, they elaborate on like the Hamitic hypothesis, which is kind of a genetic theory. They say that Tutsis were originally herders that come from the Ethiopian highlands, while the Hutus were Bantu immigrants who come from southern Africa, southern and western Africa. So their genetic differences means that they are kind of different people and who are striving for the limited resources of Rwanda. And they also propagate theories, for example, as the Hutu Ten Commandments, framing that killing Tutsis and marginalizing Tutsis in Rwandan society is a social responsibility of Hutu. And so social media, so kind of media, these kind of different medias tried cooperated to exacerbate this genocide occurring in 1994. That was an important commonality. And another example, I would say that genocides and mass deaths, they do not always occur in like physical killings and physical violence. They sometimes manifest in different methods. For example, in Ukraine, this was the weaponization of hunger. The Soviet government tried to make use of different agricultural policies to starve Ukrainian peasants. Most notably, they employed this grain quota. Grain quota is kind of a quota that the government mandates the Ukrainian farmers must hand over a certain proportion of their harvest into the state. And gradually they raise this proportion until it accounts for more than 100% of the peasants' harvest. So that even though there was a very good harvest, a lot of lucrative like grain, the peasants have to hand every last bit of it in under like violence enforcements by Soviet officials, which left them with no food to starve.
That's really interesting. That was collectivization, right?
Yes, it occurred in an era of collectivization. And one of the historical reasons for the Soviet genocide of Ukrainians was because many Ukrainian farmers, they opposed collectivization. They would not be collectivized, and they
Uh,
launched a lot of peasant uprisings against collectivization.
so this government wanted to kill them and not just
Yes.
collectivize because it was part of the Soviet ideology at the time. Okay, I see.
So basically, killing the peasants, killing a lot of the peasants. First of all, it would enhance. Excuse me. First of all, it would kind of enhance collectivization because when you kill, like for example, when you kill 1/10 of a country's population, the remainder 9/10 will be scared into not conducting any other opposition to Soviet policies. The second part was that one of the reasons behind Ukrainian opposition was because they saw collectivization as a form of Russian dominance against Ukrainian culture and society. Because Ukrainian history, it was not always a part of Russia. It has a lot of different influences from Western cultures. For example, the Cossacks, the era of Polish-Lithuanian colonization. so, um, so yes, killing Ukrainian peasants was very important for the Russian authorities because much of the Ukrainian culture actually survives in the countryside. It takes the form of folklore, of music, of like oral narratives, which passed along the peasant line. So killing a large part of the peasants would like diminish that nationalist of awareness. If, for example, if they can force every Ukrainian to use the Russian language to forget their past, this assimilation would be much more beneficial for the Soviet Union.
Is this one of the underlying causes of the Ukraine and Russia's existing
Yes,
tension?
I believe so from my research.
That makes a lot of sense. Actually, I wanted to go back to your Rwanda example. Why
Of
was
course.
why was the Hutu, I don't remember the name, Hutu government? Why
Mm.
were they the ones empowering in charge of the media, and not the reverse, having the other group persecuting them?
Because the Hutus, first of all, they account for the majority of the population. They
Okay.
were in power of Rwanda ever since the end of colonization.
Yeah.
When because like more than 85% of Rwandans were Hutus. So gradually they took control of all state institutions, and they in the initial days of independence they have already committed a lot of different purges and violence against the Tutsis, which forced more Tutsis to self-exile in abroad, which kind of strengthened the Hutu power in Rwanda. So the Hutu government has total control over Rwanda society. So that was why they were able to employ these kind of media, say propaganda, because most importantly, because Rwanda was quite a mountainous country. It was quite an illiterate country. So 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 they were most so most but most people have radios, so they were able to use radio as a form of communication that reaches every household in Rwanda to conduct a simultaneous genocide across the whole country.
Ah, that is very devastating. Um, there's another thing that I noticed was really interesting was how you mentioned the Belgians. They came in and deliberately split them farther apart, right? Like deliberately
Mm.
exacerbated the differences between the ethnic groups. That just kind of
Yes,
reminded me of how we have the left-right framing that I talked about earlier. It just set the two groups very distinctly.
apart.
Yeah, and it makes
That's
us,
true.
yeah, as a big cause of polarization today. Yeah.
Yeah,
Um,
I think for foreign intervention is a lot of the it is accounts for a lot of like political polarization, differences in like political factors, in a lot of countries. That's kind of some of them serving as buffer states between two great powers. For example, the Hungarian election is being held tomorrow, April 12th. It was currently being contested against between Fidesz and Tisa. Fidesz is led by the 16-year Prime Minister Viktor Orban, while Tisa presents a major opposition figure, Peter Magyar, who tries to expose the corruption and the strong pro-Russian sentiments of the Orban government. This is quite exacerbated by a foreign intervention because the most important point of Orban's campaigning was Ukraine. Orban had the portrait of Zelensky hanging over every like important Hungarian building. He tries to propagate rumors that Ukraine is going to invade Hungary, that the Ukrainian policies against Russia are harming Hungarian nationalist interests. So they must stop all aid to Ukraine and yeah, basically that's his agenda. And as for Peter Magyar, much of his because he is quite an unknown politician, but he is being strengthened by the European Union and supported by other European Union countries because they believe having Magyar as the Prime Minister of Hungary will be much more beneficial to the EU. At least he won't like veto all bills which are trying to be passed.
wow, that's
And
fast.
recently, JD Vance has traveled to Hungary to try to campaign for Orban. So that is a very blatant example of trying to foreign intervention to exacerbate the polarization of the Hungarian people, like those who are quite conservative and are not that invested into the Ukrainian situation will try to are more like are like now more supportive of Orban's policies, and those who do not like what Russia is doing right now will be more inclined to vote for Magyar. So there is no middle ground in between.
That makes sense. Orban is the one that dislikes Ukraine. That's saying
Yes,
we should stop. And
the
JD Vance
incumbent prime minister.
and JD Vance traveled to Hungary to campaign for him.
Yes, that is true. Well, Orban. Well, this is actually a very fascinating issue because Orban, like 40 years ago, when Orban first entered Hungarian politics, he was the one who was trying to drive out the Soviets. He was a liberal person, but after like 40 years in power and in great influence around Hungarian politics, his political views have significantly shifted from liberal, anti-Russian to now pro-Russian and anti-Ukrainian, European skepticism.
You're so educated on this topic. But how did you get into like learning about this?
Well, because as a history student, my interest in geography and different world issues is basically rooted in kind of a global curiosity. I want to know what is happening around the world. So, which is why I probed into the histories of a lot of like different countries around the world, especially, for example, small countries that are not being fully investigated. For example, last summer, my most important project was that I traveled around southern and central Europe. I went to the countries of Croatia, Bosnia and Herzegovina, Serbia, Hungary, and the Czech Republic to try to like do a bit of field research and learn more about the underlying tensions. For example, during the Yugoslav wars, for example, political tensions in Hungary, and just the general dynamics of that European region.
That's really innovative. That's really interesting. What are some issues from the past that are quite underrepresented that you think everyone around the world should know?
Well, most of my research revolves around like genocides and these mass sorts of violence because I believe genocide, which targets an entire ethnic group, is kind of the most heinous of crimes in international law. So, which is why I try to raise awareness of individual cases of these events in world history, which are not very recognized. I mean, I think the most notable genocides include the Rwandan genocide, which is kind of known by everyone around the world because it occurred in 1994. There was a lot of supervision from the United Nations and a lot of limitations by the United Nations Relief Force, the peacekeeping forces that allowed it to actually occur. But there are a lot of different examples of genocides which are undocumented in world history. For example, to give a few examples, um, aside from the Holodomor, which is the Ukrainian famine, there was the 1971 Bangladesh genocide. So basically, before 1971, Bangladesh was part of Pakistan in South Asia. And during the Bangladesh Liberation War in 1971, when it attempted to secede from Pakistan, the Pakistani army killed more than 3 million Bengali civilians, especially included its specific targeting of Bangladeshi intellectuals. There is I think over the course of the war, which lasted for 9 months, more than 1,000 university professors were killed. They were just targeted as the primary intellectual basis and potential future leadership of the Bangladeshi state. And there was the Dhaka University massacre. So the Pakistani army killed the students and professors at Dhaka University on two major occasions during the war. So that was for Bangladesh. I think the Armenian genocide in 1915 is quite well known, but a lot of people still haven't like recognized the whole scope of this. I mean, today you can see Armenia as a small country in the Caucasus, but in history, Armenia was a very large empire that occupied like most of northeastern Anatolia as we see it today. But that region was actually populated with Armenians until 1915, when the Ottoman government basically killed every Armenian living there, 1.5 million, which is more than half of the Armenian population in the world at that time. So that's about Armenia. Also, there's a lot of different a lot of other cases. For example, have you heard of Circassia? So Circassian genocide was a genocide conducted by the Russian Empire in the late 19th century. Circassia is the area around southwestern Russia, south of Rostov, on the side of the Black Sea, near modern day Krasnodar. So that region, I think more than 1 to 2 million Circassians populated that area. They were Muslims. They were in firm resistance against the Russian Empire's like Russification policies. So the Russian Empire conducted the genocide of these people. They killed more than 98% of the local population, and there are now around only 50,000 Circassians. I think around actually 500,000 people who may be of Circassian descent in Russia at the present. There were also for example, colonial policy has done a lot of damage. In Congo, there was like Leopold II who killed more than 8 million Congolese people just to like colonize the Congolese basin, help them build railroads, harvest rubber, these kind of minerals, these kind of different resources. And for in German colonization, there was actually the Herero massacres in Namibia in 1904. That genocide killed more than 60 to 70% of the native population of Namibia. There were also genocides that occurred in the history of China, although you may not have heard of it very much. For example, during the reign of the Emperor, he set out the invasion of modern day Xinjiang, which was at that time was part of the Jungar Sultanate. So it was a Muslim-based empire composed mostly of the Jungar ethnic people. If you have never heard of the Jungar ethnic people today, I won't be like very surprised because they're all dead by now. So it's after the conquest of Xinjiang by Qianlong, he killed all 3 million population of the empire.
Oh my. You said a lot of
So I
these.
believe yeah, these are just issues I believe that are so I investigate them because as I explained, I believe they are the most like heinous instance of international law in that they not only kill people, they try to wipe off cultures from the surface of the planet. And I believe like multiculturalism around the world is our greatest strength. So it is very important to notice that what have been done in the past and to make sure that the world stays as it is with its multi like with its large range of different cultures, different people to try to cooperate with each other to create a better world.
That is certainly a very noble objective. Well, that's about it for my questions today. Thank you so much for taking the time to meet with me. This was a really, really fascinating interview. Um, I hope you do well at your university and wish you the best of your day. Thank you.
Well, of course. Thank you too. It's my honor to like speak a little bit of my opinions on the matter. It is really interesting that you're interested in what happened to me in Abu Dhabi and also a bit of my other research on history and different historical topics.
Great. Yeah, it's been really interesting. Thank you so much for taking the time to meet with me.
Well, thank you too, and good luck to your studies and university application next year.
Thank you. Thank you. All right.